LSU football head coach Brian Kelly has made one of his biggest offseason goals clear: signing defensive tackles. It's the biggest area of concern for LSU, and the Tigers will need to sign at least 2 players on the defensive interior to feel comfortable with its depth there. But the Tigers have struck out on every big-name recruit they've targeted in the transfer portal so far. Their 2 biggest targets, Dominic Williams and Simeon Barrow, both paid visits to Baton Rouge and both elected to commit to different schools. Williams went to Oklahoma and Barrow headed to Miami. Jeff Palermo, the news and sports director of the Louisiana Radio Network, and Tiger Rag editor Todd Horne sat down with Billy Embody of On3.com to provide some detailed insight into the situation and its impact. I'm your host, Jake McMains, and we'll be back right after this.
I think that most people that contact the 90-Day Lifeline are looking to be heard and to feel seen.
Anybody that calls here to talk about anything that has them upset, we will talk to them.
Even on our chat and text services, you will be actually chatting and texting with a real person.
We have enough resources to be able to help people in any type of situation.
We have helpline specialists that are trained to handle the variety of calls that we get.
It's a very laid-back thing. We're not judging anybody. We're just a listening ear that some people don't have.
Back here on Tiger Rag Radio, Jeff Palermo along with the editor for Tiger Rag Magazine, Todd Horne. Coming up in the next segment, Billy Embody from On3.com. We'll talk with him about the LSU football transfer portal. LSU has missed out on some guys that they wanted to get out of the transfer portal. We'll talk to Billy about that. And actually, Brian Kelly has made some comments about that as well to Jacques Doucet at WAFB. We'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But in this NIL world, Todd, we just had a basketball player from Rutgers who said he was offered $2 million to play somewhere while being in the transfer portal.
Yeah, so we're talking about Clifford. I'm going to butcher the last name. It's Omarui. He's a 6'11" center, graduate transfer. He was leaving Rutgers. He was being recruited, or whatever you say, by North Carolina, Georgetown, and Kansas State. He ended up signing with Alabama, and he turns around and says, actually this was on May 5th, tells Larry Brown Sports and this guy named Joe Tipton that Cliff received a $2 million NIL offer from a school while going through the portal process, and it was not from Alabama.
North Carolina, Kansas State, and Georgetown were some of the schools that were recruiting him.
Exactly. So the point is that what we have going on is true free agency, especially right now. And, Matt, I wanted to talk to Matt about it a little bit, but we weren't able to. He alluded to it that, he focuses more on player development and what LSU can offer as a program. Sounds like Kelly's doing that too. And it sounds to me like LSU's getting beat on some players that they're trying to really bring in.
And we'll talk with Matt Moscona about this from ESPN 104.5, the host of After Further Review, some more. He's really come out with some specific numbers that have been offered to players that LSU was after. But Coach Brian Kelly was interviewed by Jacques Doucet from WAFB, the sports director there at Channel 9 in Baton Rouge. And Jacques asked Coach Kelly about how it's going in recruiting when it comes to defensive line. We all know that a major focus in the transfer portal is LSU trying to find impact players at defensive tackle. They got plenty of bodies to play at that position in 2024. You just don't know if any of them are good. I mean, Jacobian Guillory, I think, could be a serviceable run stuffer, but you really don't know what you have with some of these other guys that that were on the roster. They've moved from the offensive line to the defensive line. They got one guy out of the transfer portal
from
Wisconsin. But here's what Coach Brian Kelly said to Jacques Doucet, and Coach Kelly was pretty forthright about it. It hasn't fared very well, according to Coach Kelly. Well, quite frankly, because we are selling something a little bit differently. And Coach Kelly said, we are not in the market of buying players. And what he means by selling something a little bit differently, he's telling players, hey, look at the first round of the NFL draft. We just had 3 players from this school go to the first round. They're trying to sell the ability of, we got this great coaching staff. We got some of the best position coaches in college football. And, okay, maybe LSU is not going to offer some of these guys whatever they're asking for, but can they get them to the NFL where then they can really cash in and have a successful NFL career? And so that seems to me, I mean, you could look at it as, well, the LSU's falling short in the NIL world, but LSU just had a Heisman Trophy winner too.
Yeah, well, again, that's selling longer-term vision, program development, tradition. And I'm not saying that's wrong. Obviously, that's something that they're opting to do. But keep in mind, in this wild, wild west that is the NIL, you're not supposed to talk to a player in the transfer portal about NIL. Well, the defensive tackle that came in from Michigan State,
Simeon
Barrow, left here and went to Miami, and I believe he ended up signing with Miami, and I'm sure Matt's going to have some more information about that, but it's being repeated time and time again. These guys are getting their NIL packages signed, sealed, and delivered before they commit, and obviously Kelly's not playing that game, and it's hurting them right now.
We'll take a break. We'll talk more about what's happening in the LSU football transfer portal world. Billy Embody from On3.com. He'll join us when we come back on Tiger Rag Radio.
May is here, and with it comes adventure from your friends at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. Enjoy your summer with the 2024 Summer Reading Program. Besides reading fun, check out free programs for all ages at your library. Go to ebrpl.com/summerreading. That's ebrpl.com/summerreading. Your EBR Parish Library is where summer fun begins.
Now, back to Tiger Rag Radio.
And we're back here on Tiger Rag Radio. Jeff Palermo along with the news. Now I'm the news and sports director of Louisiana Radio Network. We're here with editor Todd. What's your name? Todd Horne from Tiger Rag Magazine. Been a long day today, Todd. And joining us now from On3.com, it's Billy Embody from Max Home on our Max Home hotline. Over 50,000 Max Happy homeowners and counting. Billy Embody joins us here on Tiger Rag Radio. Billy, thanks a lot for joining us. How you doing tonight, man?
Doing well, guys. How are you?
Oh, we're doing well. We're doing well. What's not happening or what's not doing well is LSU trying to land some nice recruits out of the, I guess you can't call them recruits, nice players out of the transfer portal. It just hasn't worked out so far for LSU. They've missed out on a couple of their defensive tackles that they were eyeing. There was a cornerback out of Wake Forest that LSU was interested in as well, but it ends up going to Alabama. What's the situation? It's got to be frustrating for the coaching staff, and because Brian Kelly was blunt about it during spring football and right after the final game as a spring game. We got to go out and get some more beef there at defensive tackle, and so far they haven't been able to do so.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal, obviously, that they haven't been able to bring anyone else outside of Gio Paez from Wisconsin. And look, Gio started some games for Wisconsin last year, a Big Ten program. I mean, he's not a bad player. He's a solid depth piece, and you have Jacoby and Guillory back, but you need more. You need more help. Sean Washington still has a little bit of a ways to go, and he was brought in from junior college after spending time at Georgia. They have Demarion Johnson, who's an early enrollee. They have Dominic McKinley, who's coming up, but you can't rely on those guys right away. And so they're going to have to get creative as of now because they did miss on two big names. And I think this, quite honestly goes back to the last staff on the defensive side of the ball a little bit. You had turnover with Jamar Cain that led to Jimmy Lindsey, and he unfortunately got sick. And then they didn't have anything solid there. And then they fired the whole defensive staff, and there were changes on the personnel side of things too. And those guys are critical in the transfer portal. And so all that happened in the fall window and after the season. And Brian Kelly probably would tell you, I'm just guessing, that maybe he should have just cut ties with the defensive staff right after the regular season ended and gotten this group in if he could have right now. But instead they waited until January after the portal window was closed, which left, little time to really make moves with the new staff. And so they were really put in this position where they had to find players in the spring window, and the spring window is filled with teams that are also desperate for defensive tackle help, and it's a premium position. It's a premium position, in my opinion, outside of signing a 5-star number one quarterback type of prospect. It's the hardest position to sign elite talent just from a competitive standpoint. These guys that, are unicorns and can come in and start right away as freshmen, as defensive tackles are so few, but they're so worth it because you have that position solidified, and it's hard to find guys that can do it at a high level. And so they were left to the spring window, and they went after two of the best, and they came up snake eyes on them. And I think for me, now you've got to pivot quickly and find guys like Aiden Huntington from ULM, who is in the portal now, who that's somebody that they should be really ramping up the heat on. I know he's on another SEC visit this week, and we're not really sure who off the top of my head, but he's somewhere right now. And so you got to get him in at some point, in my opinion, at least, just because he's in state. He was all Sun Belt. And then, you got to hang around for other defensive tackles like Kent State's CJ West, who's an all-conference guy who's going to be available in August after he graduates. But it's just a matter of now stockpiling, a combination of the remaining quality that's left and some quantity. They've got to find players that they can rotate, because even if they would have gotten a Dominic Williams or a Simeon Barrow, they needed another defensive tackle to just kind of take the weight off of those other guys that are in that room, because those big guys, when they're not 100% and they're not able to play as hard as they'd like to, you lose the factor of them being as good as they can be, and then you're still left with a little bit of a hole. So they need to address with just some stopgap, anything they can find at this point. There are options. They've just got to make some moves on some guys and get them to campus.
So, Billy, roughly how many defensive tackles that would classify as warm bodies that could be depth to help that situation for LSU are there currently, just to give everybody an idea, in the portal, uncommitted right now? Just ballpark. I know you can't give me an exact number, but just a ballpark.
Yeah, I would say right now, just watching the portal activity in terms of visits and things like that, you've got to walk a line of bringing in, if you bring in a multi-year transfer at this position, and yes, you need him for depth right now, but if he's recruited over and then taking up a scholarship in the future, then you're left with, okay, now the position is recruited over,
right? And
you've got to find, you kind of have this awkward just scholarship situation, and there's no other way to kind of put it. So you've got to obviously find players that can certainly help you right now. But in terms of the players that are actually in the transfer portal on the defensive line, I don't know an exact number, like you said. But there's probably anywhere from 5 to 7 guys that they can bring in, and they can find a role for them. Again, it's kind of about finding the ones that are stopgaps, because you have a Dominic McKinley coming up. You have some of these other guys that you're recruiting in the 2025 class. You're starting to maybe build up a little bit. And Bo Davis probably has certain designs next year. You don't want to have a roster that's overloaded with, talent that can't play. As much as they need numbers, they'd rather fill it with maybe a Savion Jones sliding inside over bringing in a multi-year transfer who they know can't realistically play beyond this year, but they know they need the depth. So it's kind of an awkward line to walk, but I would say there's probably 5 to 7 names that you can make the case for. Aiden Huntington, CJ West are the big ones. I know there was a defensive tackle from Wyoming that they were at least taking a look at, but not sure if they end up making a move there. But they've got to find somebody who can just give them some good snaps, and then find another one to come off the bench and just help a little bit.
How vulnerable is the defense with the tackle situation right now? Translate it in your mind to wins and losses if they don't get this fixed, patchwork fixed, what have you?
Yeah, I think you could see it against some of the quality of the SEC. I mean, you look at an Ole Miss, you look at an Alabama, games like that kind of stand out to you on the schedule when you look at it, just of teams that could run the football on you pretty well if they wanted to with the current situation. There's probably a team on that schedule or another team that are going to be able to run the football on LSU because of the current state of the interior of that defensive line. That's just probably where it's at right now. But it's hard to kind of predict what it truly means for wins and losses. I think it holds back the team from being a potential national championship contender. I don't think there's any doubt about that. With that, because you don't get interior push on the pocket in the passing game, you can be susceptible to being run on in the middle without a doubt, and some of those things, which just hurts your defense. It keeps them out on the field longer. It hurts your secondary. They have some good defensive ends and good options on the edges. They just need somebody in the middle to step up. But if this offense is going to take a little minute to get going with all the changes on that side of the ball, the defense really needed to kind of help a little bit if they could. But, they have USC, they have UCLA as the non-conference, key games. They don't have that surefire, Florida State preseason top 10, opener that they have had in the past. So maybe they can still escape that early going of non-conference with wins and keep the record unblemished on that front, and then that puts them into the driver's seat at least to be in the conversation at the top of the rankings when it comes to trying to figure out a way to get through the SEC. LSU's schedule is not that bad, at least on paper to me. I mean, they're in not a bad situation. So I just think if they can find a way to get creative, that's what they're going to have to do. And maybe you see in the back half of a season, maybe a Dominic McKinley is coming along and he can give you more snaps in SEC play. Yeah.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. You've seen McKinley play. I know he's a 5-star. I know he's good, but is it realistic to expect him to contribute like you were basically describing right now, to step in and contribute like that?
So our rankings team does a good job of explaining it like this. The closer you are to the ball, the more time you should need in theory to develop. So preference all of that by saying that Dominic McKinley does have the motor. He does have the size. He has the athleticism. If he can pick up all of the, even some of the little things that Bo Davis wants him to put into his toolbox and learn the playbook and be sound on his gaps and all of those things. And Dom's hardworking kid. He's pretty bright. So maybe that's in the cards. But in terms of expecting it, I would, keep your expectations low. I think he's going to be a great player long term, but you keep your expectations low and you hope obviously that he exceeds them just because he is a freshman defensive tackle going into the SEC. It is going to be a little bit of an adjustment, but he does have the size. He checks a lot of the boxes to at least play and give them snaps at some point in SEC play.
So without finger pointing, I would think that Sean Washington should be the player with enough college experience to be able to maybe hit the fall with some contribution, but so far no sight of that yet. Correct?
Yeah, he's didn't get on the field much at Georgia. He's a big, stout, strong kid. I think he's pretty developed. I mean, he worked at Georgia, so he got some high level coaching right off the bat in his college career. He had a solid junior college season. So LSU said, you know what, Louisiana guy, we have a need. Let's bring him in. You can't teach. I mean, Sean Washington's size. I mean, not many guys are that big and strong that are athletic enough to at least be recruited by SEC schools. He's still got to put together just everything else. And so far he's got a little bit more work to do in that regard. But if they can find a group of players that they just trust to be sound, stay in your gaps, just, at least be roadblocks for these linebackers to flow and make plays, that would be that would be ideal. And, they don't need a Glenn Dorsey at this point, or, somebody like that. They just need somebody to be serviceable and steady in the middle of that defense. And that would really help and go a long way to seeing some improvement on this defense.
Billy, thanks a lot for your time tonight. We really appreciate it, man. Good insight as always.
Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me.
It's your time to move things forward. U.S. Army Reserve.
Well, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Billy for his discussion with Jeff and Todd. Stay tuned to TigerAg.com's Audibles podcast, as we've got another episode coming up, where we'll get more insight into the financial side of LSU's NIL collective and transfer portal activity when Jeff and Todd sit down with Matt Moscona, host of After Further Review. I've been your host, Jake McMains, and be sure to check in with TigerAg.com for all of your current LSU sports news.